You're listening to Freight Famous, presented by Rose Rocket, bringing you the people that make trucking move. From behind the scenes into the limelight. Here's your host, Justin Bailie.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Freight Famous, brought to you by Rose Rocket from the beautiful Rose Rocket Studios in downtown Toronto. Just a quick piece of housekeeping. Because we're having such fun doing these podcasts, we're going to go from once a month to twice a month. So be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll be throwing some more content, double the amount, in fact, your way. So on today's podcast, we have Ryan from Trimac. Trimac is a gigantic bulk carrier. Have known Ryan for the better part of 5 years. He is the Chief Revenue Officer. Really good dude, incredibly insightful. And so today we're going to jump into things around working with Fortune 500 companies, how to think about and hire sales talent. And you know, they've got a really interesting perspective generally, and I'm hoping to hear some of that today, on how to think about the future, you know, in this crazy industry and what sort of things are changing on the bleeding edge over the next 18, 24 months and beyond. So with that, let's hear from my man, Ryan.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Sure, my pleasure. Yeah, I've been wanting to have you on. You know, when we started putting the podcast together, you kind of make a list of different guests you want to have on, and you were pretty top of the list. And, you know, just for various reasons, and that I think that will become apparent to our listeners by the end of the show. But do me a favor, can you explain you know, Trimac a little bit as an organization, and then we'll get kind of into you sort of personally in terms of your journey, you know, through Trimac.
Yeah, absolutely. I think first off, you know, we've known each other for a few years now. There's been like this kindred spirit sort of bromance vibe. I mean, the ultimate test of that is pressing record and seeing if it plays out that way. So this will be a great test of friendship today for sure.
Cool.
Which will be fun. And then in terms of Trimac, you know, 77th year in business, family-run business. Started with three brothers that we're trying to solve a problem, which is something that we're trying to continue to sort of keep top of mind as we head into the 77th year of business and what is becoming a very evolving space in the transportation world. North American focused. I think we've got 70 some odd locations when you include our shops and our truck line operations and our transload operations across North America. And really just continuing to try and find logistics solutions for our customers. Whether that be working with rail, working with shop and wash rack networks, brokerage sides of the house, and then pure asset plays as well.
And just for I think most people listening to this will have seen a Trimac truck. I'd be surprised if you haven't. But you know, maybe the listener group at large doesn't geek out on trucks that are running down the highway like I do, as if I'm a 6-year-old trying to look at every single truck there is. How many trucks on the road, you know, today?
I think we've got somewhere, we float between 3,000, 3,500 trailers in our system across North America today, for perspective.
Yeah, I got it. So yeah, massive organization. And Ryan mentioned, you know, we've known each other for probably close to 5 years now. And, you know, just a little backstory, when Ryan, and I think Ryan and I were maybe the first two that connected through Trimac. So full disclosure, Trimac and Rose Rocket do some pretty exciting business together. And you know, when Trimac first came to our door, I mean, we were a much younger company. The product was much more in its infancy. And I remember thinking, because you get these as a startup, you often get what I call sort of the enterprise voyeurs. And so it's companies that like to play with startups, but don't necessarily want to buy from them. They kind of just like to see what's going on out there. And but rarely do they turn into commercial opportunities. And when Trimac first showed up at our door, you know, I'd be lying if I didn't say it. That's what I thought it was. You know, Western Canadian based. Bulk carrier doesn't scream innovation, but man, after working with you guys, it was, or not even working with you, but just getting to know you and meet you. I think our second meeting was in like Silicon Valley. The level of innovation, I don't even want to use that word because it almost cheapens what you guys are doing. Like, you guys are legitimately making investments, not just, you know, making, you know, investments in language, but actually in money and effort in departments in terms of furthering the business and really being way more in front in some ways than you even have to be in your space, because the table stakes, you know, quite frankly, are relatively low. And so you guys are just so much farther ahead. And every time I talk to you, and as I've gotten to know more people at the organization, there is a real God, it's almost like talking to another tech company in some ways. How is that? How do you kind of manage dealing with the types of customers and the industries that you're in, and keep a real like legitimate beyond just words, motion in the investments and the innovation and all of the sort of maturation of how you guys are really leading this space and largely leading a lot of companies out there, whether it's bulk or otherwise.
Yeah, I think first step is acknowledging what you don't know. So you've got to find people like yourself and Rose Rocket and others that have intel inside the information or inside the industry of where things are going. And I think you're pretty humble in where you guys were at as an organization when we first met. I'll tell you, humbly as well. We were just at the start of our journey, not really understanding how we were going to integrate this into our business, but sort of having a base level belief that the world around us was going to change, and if we weren't going to adapt, we were going to fall further behind. And there was also an acknowledgement that if you were to compare it outside of industry, the transportation industry was already behind. And so there was a large gap there that needed to be identified, which means you got to have hard conversations with yourself in the mirror as an organization about where you're at, what you need to do, where your focuses are. And then I think from there, it was a charting of the course to say, hey, we've got to bring culture along on this. People need to believe in this. They need to see the value in this. Their workload needs to become less if we get better at what we do, things like that. That user experience becomes super critical, both externally and internally. We've got a lot of people working a lot of systems in-house. We also have customers that are expecting more from us over that journey as well. And then, most importantly, maybe we have to create that structure that you can actually deliver on it, right? Innovation can just be a distraction to the day-to-day business if you don't create the right structure. And thankfully, we had the right level of support across the organization with our board, with our ownership, to say, yeah, we're going to carve out a section of people that are in the organization today, understand the nuts and bolts of our business. I always will come back to that too, that, transportation logistics is a very operationalized business. You need people that understand how things move in and around the system. And so we carved out a group of folks and said, hey, here's our targets. Here's what we're hoping for. Let's build out a strategy on how to deliver that. But this is your core purpose now. We're not going to distract you with the day-to-day business. And the expectation is that because you came from the day-to-day business, you're going to know how to interact and speak that language and make sure that adoption's high.
Yeah, and that's I think it's easier said than done. And so again, kudos to you guys as an organization, and again, you guys have been and again an excellent partner to us, and I think in the industry, because of the relationship, because of the nature of our relationship, we have an opportunity to interact with actually a lot of your customers even, and there's just a real good I think the word partnership has really been cheapened. Sort of out there in sales vernacular anyway. But really what we get to witness is a pretty amazing partnership that you guys have with your customers. So again, just not to make this too much of a love-in, but certainly impressed with the work that you guys are doing and continually delighted by, I think, the work that not only we do, but how we watch you guys as a large organization drag the industry forward. Because selfishly, that's just good for us. And so, we see, as you guys, I think a lot of people look to you guys. You're an example. You're a big brother in the space, and so you're, I think it means a lot to everybody. So I guess from all the startups out there, I speak for us all, and thank you guys for being such a massive company. Helping make technology a central focus. Because it's not like that's not going to happen anyway. But you guys are forcing the issue a little bit, and I think that just speeds everything up. On to you, personally. When we first met, you were not the chief revenue officer, and I don't know if we've talked since then. So congratulations on that. It's a massive role being an officer in a $1 billion plus company. Congratulations and well earned. I'm curious, and I think our listeners would be too, around how do you think about. So we are here in February 22. We've been through a crazy last couple years. I've got 100 questions for you, I think, all around how you've thought about, sort of go to market and how things have changed, but maybe to kind of drill in a little bit. What are your sort of key responsibilities now? And then I want to kind of click on a few things that you're gonna touch on there. So as Chief Revenue Officer of a $1 billion plus trucking company, what do you do all day?
Yeah. First off, I'll take any loving you're willing to provide. Let's be super clear about that. This is a grindy business. We don't get pats on the back very often, so we'll take them whenever anybody's willing to provide them. Day-to-day business for me is looking after all the existing revenue streams in the business and trying to influence and help our M&A activities to broaden that scope and that service offering. So everything that we do from our commercial shop work to our truck line sort of A to B business to our brokerage business and our transload revenues all roll into me. And then what we're trying to do is sort of leverage them, right? We're trying to be very, very thoughtful about where we spend our time, where we have scale, where things make the most sense, especially in the environment we're in today. That's a recognition that I'm guessing a lot of carriers, whether you're in the bulk space or not, that you're having to step back and go, okay, there's a limited amount of resources. Where do we focus our time? And I see myself as sort of being the person that's trying to shine the flashlight on the areas where we have the best ability to deliver and be successful for our customers and for ourselves.
So as an extension of the last 2 years, and as we kind of see ourselves, coming into, the old world again, what is it that, your customers are asking for? How are you thinking about serving these customers? And I'm really thinking specifically around your bigger name brand customers. For context, Trimac is like most of us would recognize, big companies work with big companies. So Trimac is a massive player in this space. Are you guys the largest bulk carrier in North America?
We always call ourselves top 5 to be safe because those things move so fast. But yeah, we're up there.
Okay, got it. So they're working with top 5 style customers in most categories in which they would service. I'm curious about the sort of the enterprise customer. What's changed there? Is there new expectations, or as we go back into the old world, are they sort of as well?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the world in which our customers operate is evolving, and therefore they have to evolve, and their supply chains have to follow suit. So I think there's sort of 2 tracks in my mind as you ask that question. There's the current environment we're in where there's not enough drivers. It's headline news. We've got things happening every day where there's articles about how short we are in driver capacity across North America. That's one sort of conflict point or friction point that we need to solve for. And then there's the broader, journey that we talked about off the get-go where we first met Rose Rocket, and we're talking to our customers about what they want to accomplish, what their vision of their supply chain is, understanding that they need to digitize that transaction from sort of order to payment, that they want visibility throughout that we start to piece those together as well. And we make sure that we've got tracks on both on how to address both those issues.
So one thing we talked about previously was, and I don't remember why we were having this conversation, but it was around, I think, the salesperson persona and how that sort of shifted from, maybe sort of hat in hand, gregarious type salesperson to someone who's maybe a little bit more data-driven, business-centric. And when we were talking, it was almost, I think it was thematic for you guys, but I don't know if you had sort of been executing on that. Can you talk to me a little bit about how the process of hiring for salespeople and optimizing for salespeople has gone over the last, period of time, whatever that might be?
Yeah, you know what? It's funny. My team will cringe at this because I say it so often, but the reality is that our goal is to create the not your dad sales team. Mm-hmm. We need to take a step forward on what that stereotypical salesperson is, and so what does that mean to me? That means someone that is continuously evolving in their solutions. They're very, very, very solutions minded. They back it with data. They're more broadly thinking about the business. They're not very siloed. They don't have specific products that they have expertise in. They need to understand the broad range of the business. Our customers are evolving in the products that they're handling. Therefore, we need to evolve the way that we look at the business. And so, you take that and then you go, okay, well, how do you apply that to a broader sales team? Well, you start to hire from different places. We've brought people in from order desks that have run order desks and understand how that transaction feels on the customer side of things. How do they move trucks around? What are the priorities that they see from a shipper perspective? We've brought in people with data analytics background to say, hey, how do we get better at building business cases and showing data back to our customers? Certainly, and especially in uncertain times, which they are today. And like business process people that understand how information moves between companies, how we connect APIs to things that give insight into our customers and we share back information. That's a different skill set than the steak dinners and bad jokes that existed as a salesperson stereotypically for a lot of years. And we've got to learn how to harness that collectively because it's new, it's fresh. This isn't something that has existed in the transportation world for a long time. And that's not to say that relationships aren't important, but I think there's this whole element of how do you present things that have credibility and provide some form of certainty in an uncertain place.
Yeah, it's interesting because because it comes at the end of the day to the customer. What's the value? And it may be like, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it feels like when you think about the multiple stakeholders in an organization, you'd be selling to companies that you would be working with 20 plus stakeholders in some cases, and so you would have sort of the relationship which might matter at the front line, but the decision-making process happening more upstream, and that decision-making process is largely insulated against the relationship. So what they're looking for is value for output, for performance, and these types of things. And I think that's if I think even back to my initiation into sales and transportation, and just sort of date myself, it's close to 15 years ago when I first started, and largely under the model of the bad jokes and steak dinners. And I've got a lot of I got pounds to show for the steak dinners and lots of non-laughs to show for the jokes, and eye rolls for my kids when I practice them at home. So I know it well. I hope
maybe soon the sales meetings will be yoga meetings and I don't know, vegetable retreats. I'm not sure, but
I like to think I've evolved.
Some evolution, that's for sure.
Yeah, I've since New Year's been making some changes, so I've gone mostly vegan actually in the new year, and I feel amazing. So yeah, I'm evolving, I guess. I guess my point there is how do you decide? Like, how do you hire for someone like that? So you can say, yeah, I've worked in data before, fine. Like, how do you interview to know that those skills will sort of take, because relationships still matter at that front level. And then the value in the business case kind of matters upstream. And you kind of need someone who can, it's a tricky skill set, and it's a bit of a unicorn structure where you have someone who can kind of nicely bounce between the two. So what are the, types of interview questions, or where are you looking? How do you find people like this and identify them, I guess?
Great question. First off, I think there's a general sort of human experience that underlies all of that. And so we have a thing, we call it the people pipeline. Basically, I think your name might even be on the list. I'll give you some credit for this. We have a thing we call the people pipeline. And basically, if any one of our team members runs into someone in industry or out of industry where they go, geez, I had a great experience. They were quick, they understood it, they reverberated back, they picked up the broad understanding of what I was explaining in the moment, they left an impact on me. We write that person's name down and say, okay, we don't know when, we don't know how, but we're going to be in touch with that person at some point when the right opportunity comes up. And so that's sort of one tract, is that you just need to collect the data, quite frankly, of who's out there and how do you find the right people at the right time. And then they have to have that sort of, that spark that's critical. And it is a bit unicorn hiring, but I think the base fundamentals of when you get the right opportunity and then you're able to identify some people, you have to have the conversation. And for us, it always comes back down to, how's your problem solving? Can you take a complex issue? Can you explain it in a really simple way? Can you broadly apply or communicate things that can be very complex about a supply chain, but get it back to people so that it has a chance of fighting upstream? You talk about decision-making processes and how that flow of information goes. The reality is, similar to the acknowledgement of looking ourselves in the mirror earlier around our innovation journey, same thing about where we fit in the grand scheme of the supply chain, right? Trucking is a very small portion of the total cost, generally speaking, of the industry. That means that we're not getting the CEO of every company on the line to help us make a decision, which means that we have to produce business cases that hold weight, that can be explained with very little coaching from us, and hope that when someone passes it down the line and it's in the second or third hand, that they're getting the message that we're trying to convey. And so really that hiring piece, coming back to that, is around finding the right people that can get those messages across in their own way with their own experiences. And my hope is that if we get a broad enough skill set, we really get to a place where the team can interact and the solutions get better.
I love the people pipeline. I think that's maybe I love it because you said my name's and possibly on it. But I do love I do love that idea, and I think that's a great takeaway because I think a business of any size can apply that. I mean, we're constantly meeting people, and maybe it's somebody even as I was thinking about that, it was interesting how you mentioned it's maybe somebody specific that you want to hire, but it's also kind of like you can almost reverse engineer and say, well, where did that person come from? What are maybe some of the experiences they've had in life, and you can start building a bit of an archetype or a framework, if you will, around when these people have had, I don't know, a difficult childhood. They will be, whatever it might be, however granular you want to get on it. But you could, in theory, start building some pretty deep kind of assessments on what kind of makes the type of person you're looking to work with. So I love that idea, and I encourage all listeners who are looking for better ways to identify a talent that's going to fit in their business, not just practically, but culturally, and the people that strike you. And maybe it's a barista at Starbucks, or maybe it's I remember actually growing up, I lived in London for a while, and there was this guy who worked at Blockbuster, and we used to go and rent videos. And this guy he was just a clerk that worked there, but he seemed to be working there every time I went in. And I remember saying to my girlfriend at the time, I'm going to hire this guy one day. I never did, just to give a story away, but I loved this guy. And I just thought he kind of embodied all the things I didn't have a business to hire him into, but I just, you do meet those people sometimes that strike you, and they can be anywhere really. I think it's a wonderful idea, and it's sort of obvious, which generally makes some of the greatest ideas. This is the kindred spirit moment, by the way. Worked at Rogers Video. Trimac hired me away from Rogers Video. There you go. First sort of legitimate job, and exactly that experience. Didn't know it at the time, but one of the Western Canadian vice presidents of operation was coming into the store all the time. We had a great rapport, and before you know it, I'm working at Trimac. I'm not even sure what a truck is at that point. Can I just recap that? You got poached from Rogers Video to go to work at. Left a very sunsetting industry for one that arguably seems quite sustainable at the time anyways. And very good move for me unintentionally. Pretty incredible story, actually. I like that. I guess I'm curious because I know you guys as a business are very thoughtful, and you hire consultants to kind of look into the future. We have a lot of listeners here who just don't simply have sort of access to those resources. So let's help out the community here and tell us about the future in terms of what you guys are seeing, predicting in terms of industry from a macro perspective. I think some of the things that are shifting in front of our eyes is the increased communication on ESG efforts. I think we're seeing a lot of our end customers come out with statements, whether it's 2025, 2030, 2050, that have statements around how they're going to shape the climate that we live in. And so we'd be naive not to sort of see the tea leaves there to say, okay, well, how are we participating? How's the world shifting for us around alternative fuels and things like that? Someone gave me a great example, and it's resonated with me a long time, which is they asked me, how do you fuel your vehicle today? And I said, well, gas. They said, oh, is it premium or regular? That's a good question. And do you use diesel? Do you know anyone with a diesel? Yeah, okay, I do. Okay, well, what is there jet fuel too? There's yeah, okay, there is. There's racing yeah, okay, and ethanol. And you start to piece it together, and you're like, those are just fueling sources today, and they have different applications across North America on what the fit for purpose is. And so we've sort of stepped back to go, okay, we better understand all of the alternative fuels. We better not just be heavy on battery, let's say, or heavy on hydrogen, but there's a whole bunch of them. There's hybrid solutions, et cetera, that are going to have different applications throughout our network. And we better figure out how to partner with our customers to find the right applications for the right markets. Short haul versus long haul. Is there charging stations en route? Is there something local that's on private roads where weight doesn't matter, et cetera? There's a lot of different sort of variations of that. And that's just one element of ESG, but something that we're continuing to be pretty interested in. Obviously, the driver capacity piece of it, and what are the automation technologies that are out there? Is there convoy technology? Is there fully autonomous vehicles that could be running up and down the road? I think for us, it's again, we're just trying to understand the landscape and then evolve as the landscape evolves. I don't think we're trying to pick any winners at this point. We're just trying to understand what's in front of us and how we would interact with those and where the right applications to apply them are. Those are sort of two major macro shifts in the industry that we're seeing at the very least. Those are super interesting and not where I thought you were going to go at all. And again, this speaks to sort of Alberta-based bulk carrier largely, I would imagine, and I know some of your customers will be negatively impacted by a move away from these fuels, and here you guys are thinking about alternatives. And not to say that they're not shifting their businesses as well, but again, I think that's very progressive, and I haven't really heard that from anyone that I've spoken to on this show or otherwise. And I speak to people, often. I'm curious, and I think our listeners would be too, around how you guys are thinking about just the market. I'll just say this plainly. Sort of the rates. Rates are obviously up because it's supply and demand imbalance is such that it's driving. There's more freight than there is trucks. How are you guys thinking about that? Into the future. I think we have a lot of some smaller operations that are worried about a drop off in the market, and so they bought trucks a year ago that they're going to wait for another 10 months to show up. They've got new hires. Their business is growing right now, and they're trying to throw as many drivers and trucks as they possibly can at it. But I think with a conservative undertone of are we going to get delivery of these, make these hires, and the bottom falls out on the market. And so, not asking you to obviously be a fortune teller, but how are you guys thinking about sort of the environment in which sort of the rates are structured and costs and what have you, maybe over the next 12 to 24 months and beyond, really?
I think my crystal ball is super foggy, generally speaking.
Sure.
It tends to be, but I'll say, from our perspective, obviously, volatility breeds agility. Like, if you're going to be successful in this environment, you're going to have to shift. And so the way that we think about it is not to beat this over the head, but to sort of think of it from a startup perspective. We want to trial a whole bunch of operational and commercial models to see which ones have some sustainability to them that can flow with the ebbs and flows of what we're seeing. I don't know where the market's going to go. It certainly is tight right now. And I think we present this to a large part of our core customers, but basically volatility in freight rates equals volatility in driver wages. That's a pretty direct correlation. And there aren't a lot of places, especially when you're in a capital intensive business like we are, to draw cost out of when the market shifts significantly other than driver wages. And we just have a firm belief that chain needs to break. But we don't know how to do it sustainably at scale yet. It's a pretty complex answer. If the market shifts and our customers can't get their costs down, they're not going to be competitive. We're not going to have the work. And so you're trying to balance these things amongst themselves, which isn't easy to do. And so my answer back, or our logic here, is get small with it. Trial this out in 10 truck opportunities, 20 truck opportunities with different models, different pay structures for drivers that might be sustainable. Maybe you can't do it at scale, but you could get a third of your workforce on this. And then you create some flexibility or some stability with some of your labor force and your solutions. And so that doesn't necessarily address the capital demands of the business and when you time out getting your trucks and your trailers. But I think the key piece of this is that driver. And we've got to find ways to keep them engaged and keep them in business and keep them with Trimac, quite frankly.
Are you finding more synergies or empathy, for there's probably a better word than that, with your customer base, in these environments? Have things become more collaborative, just simply as a result of the environment?
Listen, when there's no capacity in the market, everybody's your partner. That is certainly something that's partially true, right? But I think when the pain gets high enough, there is an opportunity for change, and that's what we're looking for, is those moments to say, hey, this just isn't working. We've thrown all of our best ideas at it. Let's shift the paradigm. Let's think about how we actually structurally operate the business. And again, those solutions can be operational, where you start to think about how you layer your trucks and trailers and drivers, the resources you have at your fingertips, into the business. They can also be commercial. How do you guarantee pay for the drivers, or build a structure that's maybe a bit more sustainable for them, where they have the ability to generate an income that you and I take for granted every day, which is our paycheck deposits, and it looks the same as the last 2 weeks. Whereas they live in an environment, I call it eat what you kill. You get paid for the loads you move, and that's got to be a step change. And unfortunately, there's no single carrier that can solve that without customers coming on the journey. Right.
Just to sort of pivot a little bit from this, you mentioned some of the responsibilities you had, and M&A jumped out at me. Trimac has been, from, if I'm remembering correctly, has made a pretty significant amount of acquisitions over the years. How do you as now being someone who's largely sort of in charge of this, or obviously a significant part of that team, how do you think about what makes a good target? Just not going deep into obviously all the strategic black box of it, but really, what do you think about largely with M&A, and how do you target companies, and any kind of light you can shed on that I think would be interesting.
I think for us, just generically speaking, we want to build on the scale we have. We operate best. We have the most flexibility. Our customer service is the best when we have the right amount of scale in the right markets. And so where we're under leveraged with scale and we haven't been able to organically do it, we're looking to supplement in those markets, especially when there's a sort of a long-term yield there, or a vision that there's some value in that market. So we're going to continue to do that. I think the other piece of this comes back to that evolving service offering. And so what do our customers need from us moving forward? Now, we can't be everything for everybody, but we've gotten some pretty consistent messaging around what we need from our core customers moving forward. And so, for example, last year we made 3 acquisitions. We bought a company in California that is moving some dry bulk. We added, say, 100 drivers out in the California market. That's bulking up our density there. We added a wash rack in Montreal, again, sort of support services that are really key to our ability to move loads and service our customers, make sure their tanks are clean, etc. And then we bought a brokerage company called Synergies out of Austin, Texas. And again, evolving that service offering. We need to be able to play in that asset light world as well to be able to offer a holistic solution that our customers are looking for.
How do you identify, so there's the market opportunity from the Trimac perspective, and then so when you decide to say, we need to add some capacity to California as an example, or we want to add some third-party logistics as a way to widen the portfolio of services that we offer, what's important in a partner that you're going to acquire? How do you know when it's a good fit? How do you know when it's a bad fit?
Yeah, you know what? I would tell you there's people on our team that are dedicated to figuring that out, that are much more sophisticated than I am. But just generally speaking, I think we're looking for a partner where we can both add value to one another. They can teach us a little something about the market and the way that they run their business and how efficient they run it. And we can teach them about some of the systems we can bring in. And then we can find some synergies there that, the things that we're especially good at. We've mentioned sort of that innovation side of the house, making sure that our systems run really, really well and really tight and allow them to scale. That's something that they don't have the infrastructure to handle, right? And so there's some direct value that we can bring to the table for them. And they've got to teach us about their world and their business because, rightfully or wrongfully, we weren't as successful as they were in California, for example. And so we've got to come open ears and understand what made them successful. And I think that's what we're looking for is those types of relationships where both of us can add some value to one another.
If I'm running and managing a sales team right now and I'm trying to sell into Fortune 500 companies, what advice are you giving me today to help me get those messages across, sell value into there? I'm probably answering the question in some ways, but what advice are you going to give me if I'm coming to you and asking for said advice as maybe a smaller company looking for some support on how to handle Fortune 500 organizations?
Yeah, my perspective on that is provide as much certainty as you can in an uncertain environment. So you can do that by providing data. The reality is that we all have short-term memories. There's a human element to what we're operating in today, which is people are feeling a lot of pressure. Loads aren't moving as fast as they want. Their customers are frustrated. They're threatening to leave them for other suppliers, etc. So it's a really heightened environment. You've got to sort of be able to digest that, calm it down, and then bring the value that you can bring to the table with clear backing data. And if you can do that, I'm not saying that we can guarantee 100% on-time service across North America. That's not something that I think anybody can offer today. But we can with data say, hey, in this market specifically with this driver set, we can provide X and Y services. And you can start to get a feel for what that actually means tangibly with an underlying data set. And so that's my recommendation to anybody that's willing to listen is show up and try and provide some certainty, back it with data, build that business case, and we said this earlier, that can be handed off 2 or 3 steps down. That's a one-pager that somebody can read it and go, okay, this makes sense. I get what they're trying to accomplish.
So, yeah, I guess really what that is to say, like, it's It is. It's really. It does come down to really just find the value, right? What can you offer? Where do you fit in there? And be really sort of specific with that offering and be clear with that offering. I think, and that's sort of to add to that, I do find that there is a it's an overzealousness. I think, especially among sort of small to mid-sized businesses, about trying to do it all. And I think that's very, very risky. Obviously, you're going to dilute your core value prop and also dilute your services too. And I think that's even so. To your point, as a large organization that in many ways probably can do it all in some cases, or at least give the impression that you can do it all. It sounds like it's really about honing in on the thing that you can do and using data and facts to support it, which really is, again, just I think ultimately brings down to those who offer the most value will win.
We're working with a customer right now. It has a fairly large scale to it, and we decided to do some premarital counseling, is what we called it. Literally blocked in my calendar as such. And the idea is you have to address the insecurities that come with that. What's your mortgage look like? How many kids are you going to have? If you got a dog, are you going to fence the yard? You have to work through some of those things to be able to go, okay, is this in scope or out of scope? Is this the right scale? Is it the wrong scale? Should this market be part of it? Should it not be part of it? You have to be able to acknowledge that you can't solve everything, because the industry in general is so fragmented that I think anybody's naive to think that they can solve it all for a single customer. And you can practice it in scale, and my experience has been is that when you can go deliver in a market, that then becomes replicable, and it becomes iterative. So you can't solve it at once, but you might be able to solve it over sort of 5 sprints, let's say, in a solution that you're learning and constantly evolving and tweaking and getting better at it. And before you know it, you've got the market that you would hopefully set out for. But I don't think the big chunk bites exist as much with the amount of friction that's in the industry now.
You make a great point about really that marriage counseling is really controlling the narrative and framing the opportunity and just doing frame control really on the sale, if you will. Because I think the risk there, and it's easy for us to sit here and say, well, let's, this is what we're going to do. This is the value we're going to offer. But especially in today's climate, when you've got a lot of, when there's capacity shortages, you've got customers throwing everything at you. It's not necessarily you as the salesperson, the leader, the business owner saying, we only want to do this. It's the customers being very overzealous and saying, we want to give you everything, because they want a one-stop shop. This is where I think it becomes the real risk, is that our need to appease the customer in the short term will oftentimes supersede the wisdom of doing the right thing and taking a stepped approach, as you just said, and become iterative with it, get good at it, put some currency in the bank, if you will, and then start thinking about the next steps as you've learned to work together. Because back to that marriage counseling analogy, which again I love, is that you can do that pre-counseling. But you and I are both married, and I'm married twice, so I can speak to this with a with a different level of certainty. Things get real when the car goes into gear, right? And so you can decide you want to do the fence in the backyard. But I wanted to save some money and do pressure treated, and she wanted to do cedar, and that was a problem. So kind of how do we ultimately, I think there's the everything is great in that initial planning, and then we start moving freight, and then there's we didn't consider this. So as much as we can do all that preemptive work, we don't always know what it's actually going to look like in practice. And I think having a discipline and a long view of that opportunity really, again, as humans, we're just generally bad at long-term anything. We want that instant gratification. And so to say, we can get it all, we can do it all, the customer wants to give it to us fully and completely, that's almost more of the risk than being overzealous from your initiative. It's more how you handle the customer and how you manage that and frame control them. But I really love this idea of this sort of preemptive, get it all out on the table, because that's just very mature. I mean, quite frankly, it's just a way of taking a lot of the uncertainty out of it at the beginning, and I think setting the standard and getting to know them quite well at that level. How do they deal with hard conversations? Because you may have to, because in that pre-marriage counseling, it may not just be all about, check this in pros and cons lists, and maybe this is broken in your business, and if you can't do this, I don't think we can work with you in this way. That can be offensive if not delivered in the right context or framework.
think about any solution that you've ever tried to create, whether it's in your personal or your professional life. The second that you can get your insecurities out on the table, and that means truly own them, not some big sales spiel about how you can fix everything, but go, hey, I'm a little worried about this. This is going to be challenging. We need to pay attention to this. That ability to acknowledge those things just puts you in a place to really actually execute on plans. And without that gut check, it becomes really difficult to sort of anticipate and plan correctly, because we don't control the environment we operate in completely. That's the reality of it. And so if you don't have options A, B, and C and understand where the high risk points are, the leverage points are, you're creating a plan that can't be delivered on to the degree that people are looking for. And even just going through the exercise, again, coming back to this idea of certainty, you build that certainty up over time. You're like, okay, I know that this could go wrong, but now I have options A, B, and C to back it. If I hadn't gone through that exercise, I would just still be worried about it.
Yeah.
And then imagine if you hear a partner that says, yeah, we're worried too.
Yeah. And that's a beautiful moment. And I think that's also a great place to wrap it up for today. I want to go out on that note. Ryan, I really appreciate the time. I know you're very busy, much more so than I am. So thanks for taking the time, man. And it was awesome to catch up in this format, and looking forward to seeing you soon. And I kind of feel like I'm going to.
Yeah, bromance is alive and well. Thank you so much for your time.
Good to know. Okay, we'll see you soon.
Okay.
Thanks, man. Thank you all for tuning in today, and don't forget to like and subscribe.